What if I told you one of the most enduring stories about the American Civil War is actually a carefully crafted lie? For generations, the Lost Cause myth has painted the Confederacy as noble and misunderstood, while hiding the brutal truth of slavery at its core. In this video, we'll peel back the layers of this historical fabrication, uncovering how the Lost Cause narrative spread, why it persists, and the dangerous ways it still shapes American memory today. Prepare to challenge what you thought you knew about the Civil War. The Lost Cause myth was born in the aftermath of the Civil War. As Confederate leaders and sympathizers sought to rewrite history, they insisted the South had not fought to preserve slavery but to defend states' rights, honor, and tradition. This version of history downplayed the institution of slavery, turning it into a side issue rather than the central cause of the conflict. Southern writers, veterans, and political figures became the myth's first architects. They published memoirs, speeches, and articles portraying Confederate generals as heroic defenders of a just cause. Figures like Robert E. Lee were elevated to near-saintly status, depicted as reluctant warriors who fought only out of duty, not out of loyalty to slavery. The myth also framed slavery as benign or even beneficial. Enslaved people were described as loyal and content, supposedly cared for by paternalistic masters. This gross distortion erased the lived realities of violence, exploitation, and trauma experienced by millions of enslaved African Americans across the South. Women's organizations, like the United Daughters of the Confederacy, played a crucial role in cementing the lost cause. Through school textbooks, monuments, and public ceremonies, they spread the narrative to future generations. By reshaping education, they ensured children would grow up believing in a version of history that glorified the Confederacy. Monuments became another powerful tool. From the late 19th into the 20th century, statues of Confederate leaders sprang up across the South not immediately after the war, but during periods of racial tension and segregation. These monuments were less about memory and more about enforcing white supremacy in public spaces. By the early 20th century, the Lost Cause had become mainstream. It wasn't just Southern propaganda. It had seeped into national consciousness. Even Hollywood joined in, with films like Gone with the Wind romanticizing the antebellum South and portraying enslaved people in ways that reinforced the myth. At its core, the Lost Cause myth functioned as a coping mechanism. The Confederacy had been defeated, its economy shattered, and its moral foundations exposed. Recasting the war as a fight for honor allowed Southerners to preserve dignity and avoid reckoning with the brutal truth of slavery's role. But this wasn't just about feelings. The myth justified new systems of racial oppression, especially Jim Crow laws. If the Confederacy hadn't really fought for slavery, then segregation and disenfranchisement could be defended as natural or even honorable continuations of Southern tradition. History was twisted into a political weapon. The persistence of the myth also reveals how history can be manipulated. When people want to avoid accountability, by shifting the narrative, generations were taught that slavery was not the central cause of the Civil War, fostering confusion and downplaying the systemic racism that continued long after emancipation. Historians have worked tirelessly to dismantle these lies. Primary sources, from secession declarations to Confederate leaders' own words, make it clear, slavery was the cornerstone of the Confederacy. State documents explicitly stated their fight was to preserve the institution of human bondage, leaving no room for the myth's distortions. Yet, the myth still echoes today. Debates over Confederate monuments, flags, and school curriculums show how deeply the Lost Cause has embedded itself in American identity. For many, confronting these symbols feels like an attack on heritage, even though that heritage is built on falsehoods and erasure. To debunk the Lost Cause is not to erase history, it is to reclaim it. By facing the truth about slavery, racism, and the Confederacy, Americans can better understand the roots of inequality and work toward a more honest, inclusive collective memory. The Lost Cause is not history. It is a myth, carefully constructed to obscure the real causes and consequences of the Civil War. It elevated Confederate leaders, romanticized slavery, and justified systemic racism for over a century. But exposing the myth does more than correct the record. It reminds us of the power of stories, how they can be used to deceive or to enlighten. By rejecting distortion, we move closer to a truthful understanding of America's past and its ongoing struggles. And that's the story behind the Lost Cause myth, one of the most dangerous lies embedded in American history. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think myths like this shape the way we see our past and our future?